We're going to be looking at Europa Universalis, The Price of Power. This is a review copy. Very happy that I got it. I wasn't sure I was going to because I didn't have a phone number, and the delivery wanted a phone number on it. And sort of my last communication with the people was that were making it was, yeah, I don't have a phone, but you can put in like yours or something. And then if there's a problem, email me or whatever. And kind of gave me a lukewarm answer on that. And then I heard nothing more. And it ended up not coming in the time frame that I expected it. Rightly or wrongly, it doesn't really matter. But anyhow, this is one hell of a game in terms of just the components. I couldn't play this down in my basement, where I kind of wanted to, because, I don't know, that way I could play Talavera scenarios up here, but maybe I'll play Euros downstairs while I'm playing it. This isn't all. Got some more over here, some decks of cards, some information stuff and whatnot. But this is the main playing area of the game. I think it's going to take me a while to get through this. I'm going to do things a little differently, but let's first try to describe. So, let's start with my story with this game, right? I was approached, which I think is awesome, because I wouldn't have dared, not for something, that is this produced and whatnot in terms of things. I reach out to, what I think are smaller things that I think I can help. I wasn't sure I could help something like this, right? So that was very cool in terms of anything. My first view of it, this has been kicking around as an idea for quite some time. Now, obviously, I covered the old Europa Universalis board game. I have a couple copies of it. Just because I was beginning to wear my old one out, and then I never played with the new one. I have played the old one again a few times. The idea of clipping all those counters is the real problem. But, it's helpful. I have extra sheets and whatnot if I need to. I got it for like $40 for the second one, I think, which is why I did it. The first one was even cheaper because it was damaged. I bought it at the store. But I'm a long-time player of the old Europa Universalis. This is not some kind of upgrade or expansion or revision of that. The computer game for Europa Universalis, which was designed initially with Philippe Thibault, the designer of the original game, with a lot of his input, and felt a lot like it, except for the fact that it was a real-time strategy, which felt weird, but it felt a lot like it in a lot of ways. They tried to include a decent amount of history. Over the course of time, the game has changed significantly. The original game was fairly close in some ways to the old board game. When you got to EU2 and you got to the player mods, it became more and more historical events were added in to enrich in the specific experience of all the different countries. So, if you played with the historical mod, you had so many events just firing off all over the place. It was a great experience. It was sort of the pinnacle of the old EU. But then when EU3 and later, I have 4, I'm assuming they're out with 5 or whatever by this point, because I got 4 cheap. But I know they're doing them, where you can pay by subscription and stuff like that, where you don't have to buy the whole thing. You can put a fair amount of money down and play it for a few months. And given how most people play a computer game, that probably makes sense. But if you're an addict to the system, you'll play it. You'll probably want to own all the DLCs and everything. I own a lot of them for one of the version. Like for 4, I own a lot of stuff for it. Not everything, but it was kind of like a humble bundle type thing where you get to like offer them very little money for, they have a minimum. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm willing to do that. The rest goes to charity, and well, I'm not a charitable person. Okay, so after EU2, the computer game started shifting to a different focus. It stopped being so much about specific events, although some of them are still tied into nations, so that you get, the general gist of things, and became more and more about manipulating your realm and running it. And some of the choices that you made there were more open. And they added a number of things. The idea of like advisors, which feels a lot like, oh, no, I can't remember the name of it, Crusader Kings, where you're appointing specific people. But here it's a little different. And I don't remember, the events became more generic, but they were representative in the sense that, like, if the right kind of event happened to the right country and things were set up correctly, you would get the kind of royal marriage problems and whatnot that happened historically. But there was a lot less focus on, let's try to put as many events as possible into play. And you're also managing, building up your individual towns and stuff like that. That's specifics that this isn't going to take. But this draws very heavily from that, the sort of later versions of the computer game, where the feel is a little different. Now, so when I first saw this and that it was based on the computer game, I had mixed feelings. I had this, I must have it. Because it's EU, man. But I do like the computer game. I just don't play it much. I'm not a big fan of computer games. But I looked at it a little bit, and it looked a little too Euro-y to me. And it does have Euro-y aspects, which are going to be somewhat troublesome. And I just decided, for whatever the cost was going to be, again, this has been in development for a hell of a long time, and it actually shows the rules, for what they are, appear to be very well done at an attempt at something that I still think is impossible, although I will fight through it. It can't be any worse than the French rule, than the rules to the AWE game, right? Well, it's different. It's got different issues. But yeah, when I first saw it, I was like, a mixture of excitement, and it was a Kickstarter type thing. I didn't want to get involved in Kickstarters. I've done a couple, mixed feelings on them, but I kind of wrote it off as, well, I bet you people will buy it and not be able to cope with it, and I'll probably be able to buy it used. Now, I'm no longer really able to buy used games the way I used to, but I would keep an eye and see, hey, how is it? How are the feelings about it, and is it something that I will want to pick up? Because I probably would be able to get it without paying too much, paying more than the Kickstarter price. Used games tend to go a little cheaper, although you never know. This might be a once in a lifetime type thing. Who the hell knows? All right, so that's some of the history, and this is going to be fucking long ass introduction. Probably going to break it into different parts. I'm going to try to get sort of the simplest stuff. Now, again, I was excited to take a look at it. If I can get it for free, yeah, definitely. And now I get to give you guys a chance to look at it, and a fairly in-depth look at it. But I started reading the rules, and oh boy, look, it looks like a Euro, man, except it's 50 pages of Euro-style rules. And that's something that I don't believe can be done, or didn't believe can be done. And I'm still struggling with the idea, but the honest truth is a game this big and this complicated, that was always my point was, you can't fucking do Euro-style rules for anything that gets complicated, and now the Euros are getting more complicated, and the rules are just... Well, the truth is that enough excitement and interest in the subject matter makes you try harder. It's not like the old EU rules were something where you could just read them and grasp the entire game. There were enough new concepts. There were enough old concepts in there that I would see things and recognize them. And luckily, here, I'm familiar with the computer game and with the old board game. So there are some concepts that are still similar, but there's cube pushing going on. There's these little discs. All kind of stuff that is going to make play easier once you get used to it, but it is hard to assimilate the information from that. And I'm not sure that a more traditional rule style would work with this style of game. Certainly, efforts could be made, but again, part of the development work I think went into trying to make that all work. All right, let's start diving into what you have. First, you have the rulebook itself, which is a massive beast, and again, is written in that glossy paper. Lots of pictures, very Euro style. It tells you, how do you set up the game? Well, it can't really tell you that because there's scenarios, but it can give you a good start. But basically, you have to combine this with the scenario you're playing. And if you're playing a scenario from scenario book 2, you might need scenario book 1 to help you understand what you're actually doing in terms of setup. So even that is a big deal. Oh, I played the first introductory scenario in scenario 1 just to get some feeling for the game. It doesn't cover all the aspects of the game, but it covers some political, military, goal-oriented stuff, all kind of things like that, that give you kind of the basic flow of play. So I'm walking into it not completely blind like I usually am with a game, but, and I have to say, I spent less effort getting wherever I am now in this than I had to in in the old Europa Universalis. Because in the old one, I had to learn a war game first, right? And not a hugely complicated one, but one whose rules were maybe spread about kind of stupidly throughout the rulebook in some cases. So I had to learn that strategic maneuvers and whatnot in the war games segment of it, and how to deal with that. And then on top of that, a game that was at least as complex as this is. So that took me several layers to get to. But after I did some of the military stuff and figured out how that worked, the rest of the game kind of made sense from just reading, so I was able to dive into the grand campaign. Here, I don't have that complicated military aspect, but I do have the complicated Euro aspect. I can do this. Yeah, but what is that? I don't understand. It's not clear. Like cubes. What do cubes represent? They're all over the fucking place. They're used in so many different things. And also, what is sort of the feel? I can't just shoot from the hip with this because, again, it's got that Euro-y type stuff. Anyway, that's the base rule book. In addition to that, you have 2 scenario books. Now, the first one contains the smaller scenarios, I guess, some of the less complicated ones. I guess, I'm not sure. It contains the intro scenario. But before it gets to that, it has this section, it tells you how you set up, where to find your setup information, what the victory conditions are likely to be. But then it hits constructing your own scenario. Now, this is one of the most intriguing things about the game. I'm not doing it this time, but I have feelings of a sort of weird hybrid scenario that I want to construct. The reason is, I'll tell you what I really wish. I wish I had more colors and players. because even for this first scenario, there's one player who should be in it who's not. And it's the same problem I had with the original Europa Universalis. You know, I felt like I could take that game to a 7th player using the components, you know, start with, but I'd have to make up some shit. In this, they made up the shit already, okay? There are setup cards, just like in the computer game. Where do I have them? Are they in here? Yeah. There are setup cards for countries that are not in this grand campaign scenario, which is what I'm going to play. So like Portugal. Now, in the original EU, Portugal was a starting player in the 1492 scenario. This game starts in 1444, and there are other options to handle Portugal, which I'm doing. But there's one facet in it. But there are things like the Netherlands, which couldn't really be a country at that. See, it's an interesting situation because you've got they're part of the Burgundian inheritance, but they are split into, and we can see what we have here. As I said, we're gonna be doing a lot on this over time. So the Netherlands is here. It's got Brabant is still in existence here at this point, and that covers much of it. But you also have, that's part of the old Kingdom of Burgundy there, which of course is centered over here. And through various royal marriages and whatnot, that all fell under the Habsburgs, being part of Charles V's great inheritance. He got Burgundy, he got Austria, the imperial title, and he got the Spanish possessions, which was quite a massive combination. That's not guaranteed to happen. Just like in the computer game, you may not get the historical events to play out quite the same way that they would. However, we'll see what happens. The events that trigger the events should be in the deck because I'm playing with the scenario events. So to some extent, we should see the historical currents in play. I'm worried about this, though. Among other things, Austria and Spain are two separate players, and they're separate players throughout the game. So even if they do end up married, if you do end up with a Charles V out of it, and that'll happen in the second period, so I don't have any idea, because I only played a first period, half of the first period scenario. But I'm wondering how those things are going to be driven. I've seen them driven that way in the computer game. I haven't, they didn't get driven that way in the old EU. They got forced on you, and the Habsburgs were sort of almost a vassal situation to the Spaniards during much of the game. The Spaniards played the Habsburgs, but anyway, the thing that the old game did that this doesn't is that it had you swapping positions. Okay, so if you were the Portuguese player in 1492 in the old game, you would switch to be Russia at some point in the game, when basically Portugal stops being as dynamic and gets absorbed into Spain and all that. You switch over to Russia, and that's a kind of weird thing to have happen, right? And at the same time, there's a major player for Venice who gets to switch into playing the Dutch Revolt, and then may get to be Austria after sort of after Spanish succession, I think, which is why it never happened, because but it also didn't look like a victory, a reasonable choice ever. But anyway, you have starting things, and it's not just Portugal and Brabant, I guess, here. You could play the Papal States, Brandenburg, which can be interesting. Muscovy right from the beginning of the game. That's one of the options in this scenario, is to replace Austria with Muscovy. It seems like Austria is going to be such a big player that unless there's some other solution in play, I can't see getting rid of them. The alternative to that, though, is Russia is off board for the entire campaign. Now, the campaign lasts not until 1792, like the old EU did, but all the way to 1821 through the Napoleonic Wars. I don't know. Yeah, I may have to make shit up, because Poland shouldn't exist. If things go historically, Poland has been dismembered by that point, and you really want Russia there then. So countries can't be dismembered in this game, though. So I'm a little troubled by that. But we'll see what happens there. Ulm. Wow. Was that Bavaria eventually, I guess? You can play the Byzantines, just like in the computer game. Swedes, Venice, Mamelukes, Denmark. And some of these might not be the same country. This is something that's useful. There's scenarios where you're playing as teams, where you split sort of an empire. Yeah, it looks like they keep the same countries throughout. But basically, there's room for all these different players, for all these different countries to be played by players if you construct the scenario that way. And you could be playing with different parts of the board. So my understanding is the expansion, I don't know what's the deluxe version and what's not. I think this has to be part of the base game. It's got the victory point track and whatnot. But this Eastern map is actually gone if you're not playing the deluxe game. And I think probably scenario set 2 is gone. I would say if you're the kind of person who has an interest in really exploring the history in this and you're interested in the game, go for the whole thing. I can't see, I mean, if you just want to fiddle around with it, maybe somebody else is getting the whole boat and whatever, and you just want a copy to fiddle around with on your own. Also, the components are of a lower quality, some of them. I'm not sure if all this wood is contained in the non-deluxe version. Anyway, I would say go with the deluxe version. If this is something that interests you, just go whole hog. You're going to be unhappy if you're anything like me and you don't go for everything you can get. Okay. So where the hell was I before that? Ah, yes. So there's a solo and bot roles. If you don't have many players, it's possible to get people to play, to get bots to play some of the countries that you would want for the scenario, but you don't have enough players for. Since there's only one of me, I always have enough players for any size scenario, which is, of course, why I wish there was at least one more counter set, because Russia being not in the game at all, ever, is really disturbing to me. But I'm also looking at, well, there might be countries I'd want to juggle. And who would those be, though? The Ottomans get weaker late in the era, and the Poles obviously get dismembered. So those are two choices that I would definitely say I'd want to consider withdrawing from the standard game. Austria, the Habsburgs are kind of interesting, at least the Austrian Habsburgs, because, and this is why they weren't really included in the original EU, their interests are all locked in here in the empire itself, and they play rather well as a powerful NPC in the original Europa Universalis. but I can definitely see them as a candidate for a full game. Probably more, well, certainly more so than countries like Venice or Sweden, who, yes, they had some really important and Portugal for that matter. They were really important at certain periods of the game, or certain periods the game covers, but not throughout, and there were kind of small slices, and same thing with Prussia and whatnot. Denmark, all these other countries that are in the box set, it's very hard to make an argument that they were always powerful. And in fact, Russia is nothing right now. But anyway, I digress. Let's keep going with this sort of high-level intro. So let's look at what the pieces are and what you got. You got the map, obviously. It is divided into areas that have provinces in them. And the provinces, if they're underlined, they're the capital of something, which can get kind of confusing because not all countries, not all realms are contiguous. As you can see here with the Habsburgs having something way out here in the Rhineland, that they have nothing in between there. For the player-controlled realms, you use these wooden pieces, and the little guys indicate small cities, and the big guys indicate large cities, and you can see they're different on the map. Those can change during the game, just like in the computer game. Towns and whatnot can get larger and more important. Adjacency is considered basically anything in that area is adjacent to any area that's adjacent to that area. So, Oran can move, you can have forces in Algiers associated with Oran, because maybe it's the only place you have in Algiers, and you can move it to other areas. The movement is handled on an area basis, but the towns indicate your possessions within those areas, and maybe your right to be there, and whatnot. Okay. Some of the provinces have a port associated with their town, which allow you to transit the water if you have ships on them, of course. And let's keep looking. What else you got? This is the rest of the world map. Now, the rest of the world map links up here. So like A here links to A up here. B links to B. Okay. The old EU used an inset for Europe, which also worked. You also have transitions between maps here and here. So E links to E here. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Blackbeard. This track here is your prestige track. Prestige is what the game is all about. Most of the scenarios are about gaining the most prestige, and there are a lot of ways to gain it. We will hope that this is a more balanced game than the original EU was, but we're not sure because the computer game is definitely not balanced, right? Some countries start off big and they're able to maintain, a certain power base and whatever, and they get options. But the real problem in the old EU was that some countries had to pick options and had to go through events that hit them with huge victory point penalties that no matter what else happened in the game, they were going to finish last or second to last. Really, I would say the only person terribly hit by this was Poland-Russia. Poland could make huge points for you early in the game. You play the first period, Poland and Spain are the people who are going to win that pretty much hands down. If it's all you're playing, you might want to target, Portugal and Spain. I think I said Poland. Wow. But when Portugal turns to Russia after 2 periods in the original, it seems great, you know? Portugal's done with its period of expansion. Russia's entering into its. The truth of the matter is, Russia is just this huge point sink. And not only is it a point sink, you can't just fix it by fixing the points in the original game, but you've got to fix it by fixing the events. And no one has done that as far as I know. The Risto events don't do that. Okay, over here you have another little off-map area which connects to F. Up here. Just as a, hey, okay. What else on the map? Each area has a religion associated with it. That religion can change in the course of the game, and you use these markers to indicate that. It's also possible that the religion could be considered diverse. So mishmash that it doesn't count as any singular religion. And then there's also a final state, late game religion, which is the revolutionary, which I think is meant to sort of fit revolutionary France and that expansion of the belief system there. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how important that is outside of the revolution itself. Once Napoleon takes over, I feel like things sort of change, so I don't know what that's meant to represent exactly. Okay. Again, on the board itself, you have these counters to indicate ownership of things by player realms. Down here, these are dynamic non-player realms. Now, that's sort of an option to start with those on the board. I chose to do it because I don't know. Always make everything as complex as possible, and I am doing that. I'm making everything as complex as possible. These are light ships, which are sitting on spaces that are merchant protection spaces. These are going to be important. They aid your merchant, your trade value for certain merchant zones. Merchant zones are these circles here with a little trade basket in them. They're not all at sea. Here's one on land. Not as much room on that. In order to utilize those, you basically have to trace back to your capital using either boats. They don't all have to be in merchant protection zones. Using your boats and or land connections through a port. That's a way to generate money. The little guys standing in them are your merchants. You start off with 2 of them. You can get an additional one later in the game. But that's through play, and I don't know quite how it happens. I think it's through getting an idea. That's another concept that's here as ideas, which I think is very cool. So it handles, sort of the philosophical, the scientific advances and all that. All mixed into the same system. And I think religion is sort of mixed in that idea sort of way, but we'll see how that works. I don't really recall everything about how the computer game handles certain stuff. Okay. What else do we have? So the shields on each location indicate who owns it at the time of the start of this scenario. This is a 1444 scenario. There's, what is the other one? 16 something. The other period is 1618. Those are the prime starting points, but they may not be the only ones. I haven't looked through, but it's quite possible that you could have modifications to that year to get you to a different position. And I'm pretty sure that that's the case, that they do that. I don't know. I haven't looked through the scenarios that much. What else we got here? These Cubes sitting around here are influence cubes. Cubes serve a lot of purpose in this game, and I've got some weird questions in my head of whether the interrelations of things that cubes can do all make sense. This is an army. Each realm has 3 armies, unlike in the old EU, where armies and their size were based on the nation and the time period it was in. Here, the number of armies you have is fixed at 3, and you're allowed no more than 1 fleet. Although you've got these are light ships when they're loose like this. And the size of the army is based on your manpower, which will be directed from your player display over there. You have certain diplomatic and other aspects. So this is a royal marriage between the Hungarians, and you indicate that by putting it close to Pest, which is a capital of the Hungarian kingdom. The Hungarian realm stretches through here. Now, there's not markers on it or anything. It's in its base state. If somebody else takes something, there'll be markers for that somebody else. Chances are that'll be a player realm. If it's not, it's got to be a dynamic non-player realm. Dynamic non-player realms are allowed to expand. There's 3 in this scenario that they suggest. You could push others into play and just say, well, they count as them too. But I'm a little iffy as to why Venice isn't, but it's, I don't know. Venice and Genoa are about equal at this point. Let's see. Looking around for other things. The colonist pool, that you put cubes in there again. Now, cubes are a limited commodity. That's where the problem arises. Cubes are a limited commodity, and they serve several purposes. One is to indicate diplomatic influence in areas. One is to indicate how many colonists you have available to go to the New World. Another is how much power you have politically within your realm stored up. You're allowed to store those cubes up, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And there are other uses for them. I'm trying to think. As you lose cities that you own, if somebody captures your cities that you own, cubes go in there, and it's just this weird situation because again, it's a fixed amount. You're not allowed to make new cubes. You are allowed to make new money, but. Let's see what else we have. So we have the royal marriages there. We have alliances. There's an example of an alliance. You have claims. On the other side of these, this is this is a casus belli. But there are truces. There's other markers for warfare. Truces are on the other side of this. Let's think what else we have. We have vassals represented over here. Only Poland has vassals at the beginning of this scenario. Vassals they're handled very, very differently from how I'm used to in the old EU. The old EU handled vassal states as basically the highest level you could diplomatically control something before you annex it. Here, they feel almost controlled. Like you get income from them, you get armies from them. I'm not quite sure what else to really say about them. I didn't have any in the scenario I played, so I don't have a great deal of comfort with them. Okay, let's look at what the players have. So over here we have a player display, and this is the main national display. It has a certain amount of towns and larger towns or cities or whatever available, each of which holds these wooden things. As you get more and more of these, you get higher income and higher manpower reserves that are built up due to that. Vassalage works very much the same way, except the first one is about equivalent to a small town. but every other vassal marker is only half as good as actually owning something, for whatever that's worth. You have a stability track. If you recall from either the computer game or the board game, stability is an important facet in the situation. I found this kind of strange. In the starting scenarios, now there may be some that change this, but in the scenarios that I've played, there's a base rule in the game setup that's not being overridden anywhere, where stability is always 0 for all the countries. Every country has a treasury of $15. This feels a little too common. You know, it doesn't feel like it's representing the reality of every country at every point. And therefore, it feels strange that they would just have these defaults in play. Everybody also starts with 3 cubes in each of their 3 types of power. Now, there's nothing like this in the computer game, but there is this concept of you have power and you expend that power to do things. And that translates over to this game. That's not how the board game works. The board game worked with you have a certain set of stats that your king has, and that's the case here. So Charles VII here has a 3 administrative, a 1 diplomacy, and a 3 military value. But instead of that translating to modifiers on you know, how well you do things, which is what the old board game did, and I think the first versions of the computer game did. Instead, what you have is that generates you cubes, and those cubes can be spent to perform actions later in the game. Your military is divided into 2 sets, available and exhausted. There's also deployed. And you get additional troops. Allies can just feed into your troops for the course of the war that you're in. And basically, when they die, they go to the exhausted thing, and then you have to pay to bring them back. Your manpower, the total number of little dudes you have, so 4 from here and 4 from here, so there should be 8 on the board. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Bingo. And that's the case throughout the board, throughout the situation. Infantry, cavalry, and artillery are 3 different types of units that you can have, and they're assembled into armies. You can only have them in armies. And you pay different amounts for them. They have slightly different values in the combat system, which... yeah, now realize I go through the rules in my intros normally. We're going to do that, but that's going to be later versions of it. This is going long enough, by far, that we'll dig into the rules on its own. I need to dig into the rules on camera, both for the few people who are interested in seeing that kind of depth, but also for my own edification. Reading the rules aloud that way actually helps me catch things, because I read the rules, I played a scenario that didn't use maybe half the rules. So I do need to do that, but I do have a basic idea of what happens. So here, your different armies are arranged with the types of troops that they have. These all take the same manpower from here, but they have different costs, and they have different effects in the situation. You have 3 armies, each one's represented by a different icon on the figure, and you have a fleet which also has a figure. Light ships can be sent out to sea without a fleet, but if you have anything that's not a light ship, and you can include light ships in a fleet, it has to be on your only fleet. Again, feels a little weird. Feels to me like Spain, the old EU, had, again, each nation had a certain number of fleets that they could deploy, and those were not small numbers. Fleets are not as important in this as I would think, as they were in the old EU. For the most part, you can't do things like, control a sea area. well, you can't control the entire access to the sea. So, for example, the Spanish in the old EU could have put ships to prevent the English from making any crossing whatsoever if they wanted to, right? And thus kind of just block them in, and the English would have to fight their way through on any kind of movement. Here, there's some interception capability, but for the most part, if the enemy is going to deploy their fleet and try to cross over, they can do that as long as they have enough pathways to make it through. The other important thing is, especially for a country like Spain or France, it would make sense for there to be both an Atlantic and a Mediterranean fleet, and that's not here. So that's a little troublesome to me. Okay. Outside of that, what do you have? Oh, so this is... okay, we'll pull this one out. I think this one's the easiest. Each country has a setup card for the scenario and time period that they're in. Again, all of these are based on the 2 years that the game has. So maybe there aren't any scenarios that are different from those years. But it lists all all this information is in the scenario book, so it wouldn't be necessary for there to be a card. It lists all the information for your setup, and in addition, it gives you your starting ruler. And to read this, the ruler's ratings: administrative, diplomatic, military. This is his death symbol. Every now and then, a symbol will come up through event cards that says that leader, that people with that symbol become sicker, and they'll get, over here, they'll get a broken heart, and if they get 2 of these, they die. One doesn't affect your stats as far as I know. You have the nation it's associated with. If it's associated with a specific nation, sometimes rulers can come into your hand that are not associated with anything. And he has military capabilities. Not all leaders will have them, but I think all the ones to start do. You're able to make your ruler into a general. There's some risk in this because you can die in combat. And that can be bad. That could get you to an interregnum. Yeah, can't get this under with just one hand. You can tell if somebody's a leader if they add dice. Combat is going to be handled with dice. He would add 3 of these blue dice to your capability. And it's kind of a buckets of dice type thing. You roll certain... kind of reminds me of Combat Commander. You get certain results. If they're the right results to match what you've got, you do hits. So Mehmed here, rightly, is given lots of artillery. What that means is he wants to build artillery pieces because he's better in battle with those. Now, different dice... There's infantry dice, cav dice, and artillery dice. You get infantry dice for free in combat, but they're the best at generating infantry hits. Cav and artillery dice are better at generating cav and artillery hits. Makes sense, but it's just like you want to be able to have leaders who match the troops that you're going to have deployed. Also over here, these I haven't made my decision yet, but I picked 2 of these. These are my missions for the first era. And they tell me something that I have to do. So here, England has no ports, towns, is what those are, in Aquitaine and Brittany and Normandy. And if they succeed in getting this, they'll get 5 prestige for it, marked down immediately. And they'll also get an effect, which is gaining a claim in Seine and an insane claim, and either remove some unrest or gain a couple of cubes in certain locations. That's pretty much what the nations have. Let's take a look at some of the other stuff that is in the box. I have not explained these. These are little tag markers. I believe these are unlimited. When there's something that you have to mark as yours, that's not like a possession on the board or whatever, we might see it with these. I don't remember what those are called. They're not missions, but they're like missions. Or maybe they are missions. They're milestones. When somebody succeeds in getting a milestone, they mark the card with that. There may be a few other places where those are used. But yeah. Oh, here's another thing. So the cubes are also used over here on the Papal Curia. So this is kind of directing a lot of aspects of the game. It determines who has the most power in Rome itself. There's going to be this weird sort of mechanism here where when you take turns, you basically pick an action and do it, but the action may be an event which puts you into here. You must take one and may only take one event in the course of each round, each series of rounds, whatever it is, each round, yeah. And then you pass eventually, and you get a bonus for passing later or earlier in the turn, but I gotta swap batteries. But passing early can give you a disadvantage in terms of being able, to continue reacting and doing your stuff. And you'll be spending your cubes to take your actions. Let's take a look over here. Okay, so this tray contains some stuff. Money, 1s, 5s, and 25s, I believe. That's how I'm going to use them. These are more troops. These can be rebellious troops. They can also serve... I'm trying to remember what else they can serve as. They can serve as rebellions. They can serve as troops from non-player realms. They may have another usage for allied troops. I don't recall, in which case I played them incorrectly. These are pirate ships. These are Imperial Influence cubes. You'll see there's a few of them here. The Holy Roman Emperor has certain special influence capabilities that he can use the empire for, and that's based on his imperial authority. He also gets additional troops based on that. I haven't put any of the troops down here. And he gets additional bonuses from higher authority that he collects during the income phase. These, as I said, they're broken hearts. On the other side, loans. If you run out of money, you're able to take out loans, and essentially you're essentially charged an additional $1 immediately. The loan is going to give you $5, but to pay it back, even if you do it in the same round, you have to pay $6 back. And each round that you have a loan, each time you hit income that you have a loan out, you have to pay another $1 on each of those loans. These are heresies, of course, and this is rebellions. These are used to mark over a location that is subject to that. These are mercenary units, which you buy into your army. They're more expensive than your regular troops, but they don't take manpower, which can be useful. Oh, all right. Let's take a look at some of the player aids here. Oh, we haven't looked here. Okay. And these are the dynamic realms. Religion markers. We saw some of these on the board. What's this? When trade zones can be expanded, they get this marker, and it shows that they're going to be worth more money. I don't remember what this is for. Occupied markers. Yeah, I don't remember what all this stuff is. These have something to do with the Empire. I don't know what the hell these are. Haven't gotten to them. The Pope can either call a crusade, or, and we'll get to them in the rules when we go into the details, or can excommunicate a player. All right, let's take a look at the cards. So, mission cards. We've already looked at a couple of, the fact that the players have mission cards out. They pick 2 at the beginning of the game. But then, during the course of the game, they will get more as in each period, and they may have opportunities to swap missions in and out. And there's just a richer deck there. These guys are the first era missions. I think everything else is sort of lumped together. Milestones. These are the ones we did not use. There's basically 4 of each type. Here, economic, political, warfare, and expansion. And you will be getting 1 of each type dealt out in each era. Or is it each round? I don't remember. And they're kind of at random. It's the trade deck. I'll explain the mechanisms of trade a little bit when I go through the sequence of play. But then, again, I am going to go, I think, in more detail through the rules. Feeling kind of like, Jesus, isn't this enough? It really is. But this is the event deck. The event deck is constructed in a very odd way. Now, I am playing, I think, with the correct event deck for this scenario. I had some thoughts of fiddling around with that, but that's really the scenario construction rules. Basically, you're going to have 2 halves to your event deck for each era. So the first half is a certain set of events. The second half is a certain set of events. But there are some replacement possibilities in there. And there's definitely some desire to kind of randomize that. The problem is, whoever does the randomizing is perhaps going to know which ones are where. You could also randomize, well, so there's specific ones, so like 11A1, 11A2. Those are going to be defined by the trailing number to be in which half they belong. Some of them, I believe, are listed something like 11A3, which I felt like, wow, I want to shake things up and everything. I think that's probably a bad idea, so I tried to go with the required. The Bs are more discretionary. You could construct the scenario with different Bs. So here I have like 154, 155, 156, 157, 158, 159, 160, 162. 161B was left out, okay? And there's no real good reason. It's a real thing that happened, right? It's just the feeling was, hey, this will give you a more historical lock-in, and if you get rid of one of the others. The key is there's an X number of events, okay? And it's basically, there's basically two sequences, I don't know what the fuck they're called, 2 rounds in each era. Which means there aren't a lot of, each round is basically a turn. There aren't a lot of total turns. There are only 4 eras, right? 2 rounds, 4 eras, that's like 8. they say 16 rounds. No, there's 2 rounds in each half of an era. So there's 4 rounds in each era. Okay. Yeah, because I played a half and there were 2. So yeah, there's basically 16 turns in the game as a whole, which doesn't feel like a whole hell of a lot. Now, each turn is kind of like, I think if you got your play down really, really quickly, as well as you could, each turn, each round is kind of like a turn in something like Virgin Queen or Here I Stand. Less so Here I Stand because I think that just moves more quickly. But that may just be me. And I think this has a lot of complexity to what it's going to be involved in here. And it has some of those same kind of feelings to it in some ways. Just did one that really had feelings of that type, the Time of Wars, Eastern Europe thing, which was an exciting concept but was troublesome. So anyway, you basically stack the event deck by period and by events, but to some extent you have some capability to fiddle around with those. You could go much more random, and, you know, perhaps mutate the world really heavily, which is kind of exciting too. I didn't talk about these. These are trade cards. Yeah, I was going to talk about the mechanism for them later. And let's see, what else you got here? Well, here's what a trade card looks like. And it gives you choices of different nodes to take. And basically you draw 3 of them, and you choose one, and you activate it. And things that trade in it get to trade. Oh, power struggle cards. Have not explained these. These are going to be general, kind of like the missions up here. But they really kind of focus everybody's attention in one place and look at one of the major events of the period and kind of pull everybody into it. These are like the big events in the old EU, things like the 30 Years' War and stuff that really kind of drive play for a lot of the players. And I think 30 Years' War is one of them. I think the War of Spanish Succession is one of them. This scenario suggests you only use certain ones, which feels a little weird because it means that I'm leaving out some kind of things that seem kind of key, like the Holy League, the Great Northern War. Well, Sweden's not in this, so this would fit better in a game with Sweden in it. Distant trade. Okay, and these kind of focus you. So for example, Great Northern War here would focus you. Here's some territories listed, and if Poland, Sweden, Denmark, or Muscovy doesn't have enough stuff in them, they're going to lose some prestige. And here's that little dagger symbol that one of the markers had, so maybe these relate to that. Again, not something I played with in that little scenario. So you got the bot deck. The events, we can look at these. Okay, so here's one that didn't get played. 11A-2 should be in there. Huh. Okay, this is a problem. I'm gonna have to look. I think I put in 11A-3 instead, but this will generate an event that impacts certain players, and it has, you know, so the person who triggers this event will get a choice between A or B. They get to pick which one they want to have effect, and that affects whatever players are involved in it, but it can also affect to them. And then there's a string of little icons that indicate problems that happen. So like this would create some rebellions. This, I think, creates some activity for the NPR, for the dynamic NPRs. That's what it looks like. And this says people with squares as this little symbol here get a health check. I've got to check this because obviously I am not playing with the historical deck. But I may be okay with that. I may have made that choice. I feel like I reversed that choice though. And then we have these things, which are your action cards. There are some basic actions you're going to be able to do in the course of a game, but then there's also not so basic actions. And you kind of need a card for that. And you'll pay a cost, and this will be a cost in cubes in this case. This will cost you military power cube to do this action, and you can take that action. This indicates that it can be played as a reaction. I'll have to reshuffle this one, so I'll look further. Here's one that cannot. This allows you to move an army up to 4 spaces. Normally you won't be able to do that under basic. Gives further rules on it. In addition, these cards could be used for the character. Now, if the character is a circle, you can use them as your ruler. And if you don't have a ruler, you can put them in there as your ruler. You might have opportunities to use them for that otherwise. But you can also use them as a general, in which case you pay the military cost listed here, and then you get a general, you associate them with an army or whatever, and you have them. The other kind of bottom portion are advisors. These can't be rulers, but you can assign these to an advisor position. So this is a military advisor, and it will increase the ruler's military capability when it comes to generating cubes. I'll leave these face up so I know that I have to reshuffle them. The combat dice, like I said, you're going to get 3 white dice on most battles, but if you have generals, you might get additional dice, and your goal is to make rolls that are like the stuff you have. So if you have infantry, you get this. If you have cav, you want to hit with cav. Well, then you'd rather have a leader who adds a cav die, because they add more hits for cav. These dice here are for making rebellion checks. If you have unrest in an area, I don't think anybody does at the beginning of the game, but if you have unrest in the area, it's indicated like that, or other ways, then you have to roll dice in that area. You roll 1 die in the area for each unrest you have, and the markers there can cause bad or good things to happen. Never too good. They get rid of the unrest. Then we have 2 more dice that I don't know what they're up with. This one might have to do with the bots. And this also came with a regular 6-sided die, which I use for making decisions, of course. But it probably has some use in the game that I have not run into yet. Right. All right, so that's the components for the most part. Oh, there's 2 things we haven't looked at over here. A couple of player aids. Okay. When you do a battle, they give you a little flow chart for that, and a little flow chart for peace resolution. I've been not using these. I may want to look at them and see if they match my understanding of the rules. And then here, you have a list of all the different realms that exist on all the nations. And, you know, how much they're worth and whatnot. Just to give you some additional information, sort of like a gazetteer. Finally, there's the main player aid, and there's one of these for every player. Right. Okay. So, let me go briefly through the sequence of play, give you an idea of what's going on, and then I have to think real hard if I want to wade through the rules. Because I know that's not very useful to most people, and I'm going to have to look up rules constantly as I play. I found that to be the case. Sure, some of them start to become more integrated, but I did find myself looking up stuff like whenever I had to do peace, or I took an action that I wasn't used to. Okay, so at the beginning of each turn, of each round, and remember, There's 4 rounds in each era, 2 in each half of each deck. Okay. At the beginning of each round, you reveal the event cards that are going to be available for that round. And that'll be just drawing the top 3 cards. Well, no. That'll be drawing a number of cards equal to 1 more than the number of players there are. So we'd be drawing 7 cards. The first 3 are face up. They're available for people to use. Okay. Then each player will be getting 3 cards from these decks of their choice of type. Now, at the beginning of the game, you're going to start with, I believe, 6 of those cards. The setup's a little different, and I haven't done that yet. Basically, you get 1 of each type and then 3 additional. And you get them for free. Then you have, at the beginning of the game, you get to hold all your cards for free. But on every additional round, you're going to have to pay for each card you want to keep. And you have to pay 2 ducats, denarii, whatever. Then you're allowed to pick and replace missions. You are allowed to have 2 in your hand. If you use them up, if you succeed in them, you get new ones. But you can also replace them. I don't know if there's a cost for that. All right. The meat of the game is the action phase, in which each player in turn does one thing, and then maybe some littler things. Now, one thing could be playing a card, it could be taking a basic action, it could be taking an event. Okay. We'll go into that in detail now, I guess. All right. So you have a series of basic actions. You could choose to put one of the events in play. And we have not yet drawn those. But once we draw, once we have the events out, one of the things you could do is select one of those events. The number here doesn't matter. That's for setting up the deck. So this has to be in the second half of the deck. X's can be in either half. And you trigger that event, and in addition, you put 2 money from the pool onto each event that was not chosen, that's face up, and you turn another event face up. So everybody will always have 3 events available until there aren't that many left, and they collect money on them. So the less attractive an event is, the more money it collects up, and you get that into your treasury. That feels real Euro to me, right? That feels like it belongs more in some sort of economic game. But because your choice is, it's like, do you want a rebellion, whatever. But it is a mechanism to allow players more choice rather than simply, okay, I'll draw an event. When you draw your event, or when you choose an event, I think I said this, you move over to here. Because you're only allowed to pick 1 per turn per round, and you must pick 1 per round. You're not allowed to pass until you've done an event. Player-to-player diplomacy. So you can expend, I believe you have to expend a diplomacy cube to do this, and you can come to some sort of agreement with people. And just how that works, we'll talk about that. Okay. Research an idea. There are idea cards. Now, this is what pisses me off, because I think the idea cards are in these. But I don't know what they look like. There were no ideas I had no idea is in my game that I played already. There is a very good index here, which is really important. So you'll be seeing me do this a lot. 12 and 21. Those are by page, not reference. So, So I have not seen, I don't know where these are. Look at 12. See what they look like. You know what? I'm going to take a pause because I think there's cards that I don't know where they are. And indeed, that was the case. I found a whole bunch of cards I didn't know about. So basically, at the beginning of the game, there's 3 basic ideas that are available. That's this tolerance, cannons, and quest for the new world. And then there's some random ones. There's more that get added in as the eras pass, but there's just sort of a randomization as to what's going to show up and what's not. So for example, cannons here allows you to recruit artillery into your armies. Instant effect, gain 1 artillery into an existing army. Well, I screwed up. Last time I played, I allowed cannons to be there. I figured they should be since they, were tagging them along with their armies since like, the mid-1300s, but I understand the difference. The old Europa Universalis didn't allow you to have firepower at all, which was cannons, until you researched your first technology. And these are going to kind of replace technology levels in that system. I don't remember how the computer game worked. I know it handled tech, but the concept of ideas replaces the tech level there. But these are a little different, and they have a cost to them. So let's see what this says, if anything. It just says research idea, cost stated on idea card. I think the concept there is, I can look it up, but I'm guessing that you just pay. Let's take a look here. The actions are a little further down. You pay the monarch power and cost and place one of your tag chips. Researching an idea will get you, yeah, okay. So, yeah. So if you want to research an idea, it's a basic effect. You'd have to pay. Now, you start with only 3 cubes of each type, which is not enough to buy any ideas at the beginning of the game. On the second turn, if you save up for them, you can pick them up, and some of them can be kind of cool. So this is kind of cool. Less religious dissent. Reroll a rebel die. All kind of nice stuff. Here, you may use your ships when performing the explorer action. Well, gosh. So without ideas, a bunch of actions weren't available in play, and I didn't realize that I couldn't buy cannons. So I actually bought cannons, and that made the French do better than they would have otherwise in the play that I had, because they had a leader who had cannon capability. And we've got people like Mehmed here, has 3 cannon dice. Well, that's fucking not entirely useless, but it's pretty damn pointless if you don't have cannons. And cannons are very useful in making sieges. So that becomes a very valuable thing for him to pick up. The problem is, how long can he live? Living through an age is probably a pretty big deal. Okay, let's look at the next actions here. Change state religion. Yeah, no idea. There might be times when this is a desirable thing. It's going to certainly cause some unrest or whatnot. Change national focus. I don't know what national focus is. Again, this was not available. You put a cube in the change national focus slot. You increase one type of monarch power by up to 2 by moving a maximum. Okay. So you're allowed to do this once per round. It allows you to shift some of your power markers and play and exchange cards as well. Okay. it's not as dramatic as I thought it was. It just lets you, hey, I'm at war now, shit, I had better switch from, you know, the cubes that I was playing and cards I was planning on to something else. There's got to be a cost to that. Doesn't look like there's much. Doesn't look like there's much of a cost to that. But you can only do it once per round. Okay. You can do an exploration action, which I find is what uses this die. Kind of makes sense. And you need Quest for the New World, the idea, to do this. Hey, how did I buy that cannon? Requires cannon idea. Yeah, I just didn't look. Yeah. Like I said, these rules tend to be pretty good for what they are. They shocked me at, you know, the amount that they're able. They don't. The only problem is that reading them doesn't really give you a great idea of what's going on, because it's not a standard type of game. You know, it's not really the rules format that's the problem there. It's more it's got concepts that don't link directly to, like, you know, things are described with icons and everything throughout it, and really without playing with the game and looking at it, you're not going to really kind of understand what things mean in the rules by just reading them. But that could be handled differently, I think. I don't know. I've got to swap batteries, and I'm running into troubles. Okay, we'll keep looking at what we've got here. So explore. Obviously, you're going to be wandering off on the map, making a die roll to see if you survive and whatnot. Again, we'll hit that when I dive into the rules. It's not something that I was able to cover, I was able to play in my solo. There's minor actions. Minor actions you can always take. They don't really cost you. You get one action each turn you get in a round. But minor actions you can take for free. So taking and repaying loans, you just do it, right? Appointing an advisor or a leader. The way that happens is you look at your hand of cards, you find somebody, and I showed you an example before. For example, this guy, you'd pay 1 ducat to appoint him as an advisor. Now that loses you that card. You don't get that card as an event then. So there's kind of a, hey, what do you want to use things for? Call to arms. This is when you call on allies, if you're declaring war or if somebody declares war on you. Replenish manpower. You can spend a military, as many as you like, because it doesn't take your turn, to fire off and move 3 of your soldiers from exhausted to available. Cut ties. I don't know what the implications of this are. They're probably not all good. They probably harm you. But it's basically if you want to cut a diplomatic alliance or marriage with someone, you can do that. Administrative actions. Okay. You can spend administrative cubes, 5 of them, plus or minus your current stability. I haven't looked that up. I think the further you are from 0, the harder it is to do. That's sort of an Empires of the Middle Ages thinking, though. So I don't know. I don't know if that's how it works. Again, we'll look at it in the rules specifically. Converted area. These do cost a turn. Everything except these miners do. Convert an area, you pay 2 administrative and 3 bucks, and you can change the religion of an area to be your own religion. Now these start as diverse. So the Spanish, for example, are sitting in an area that they're not religiously aligned with. Colonize. Okay. You're going to need, you pay administrative, you have to pay a colonist from your colonist pool, and you have to have a shipping route to the foreign distant lands that you're colonizing. Diplomatic actions, these are going to use diplomatic cubes instead of administrative ones. You can basically play influences. For each influence cube you want to put on the board, you have to pay one of these, or you can pay money. But you must pay at least one of your diplomacy cubes to do this at all. Forge alliances. Now, this requires that you have 2 cubes in the area, 2 influence cubes in the area of the capital that you want to forge an alliance with. You pay the cost, which is a maximum of 3 diplomacy cubes, and both the powers involved, the player and the non-player, have to be at peace. This kind of alliance can only be done on non-players. To do player alliances, you're going to have to do player-to-player diplomacy. Fabricate claims. Okay, so this costs you 2 diplomacy for each claim you want to play. There doesn't appear to be any requirement for that, and it is a subvertive task, which means it has there's certain special capabilities that come into play in that. And you could play a diplomacy to fire off the trade sequence. In the trade sequence, like I said, you draw 3 of these trade cards, you pick one, or not. You can just take a couple of bucks if you don't like any of them. You pick one, you fire off that trade zone, and you collect income based on that. For military actions, you can declare war for 1 military. That will give you sort of a free opportunity to either move or fight, depending on what happens. I'm sorry, move or recruit. So you get the cost of activate units or recruit for the same for that same declaration of war. But the declaration of war calls in all kind of other possible impacts. If you don't have a casus belli, it ends up hurting your stability. One place you get casus belli from is from having a claim in a territory that someone else is. So the French have a casus belli here in Brittany and Normandy. That means they can attack either Brittany or the English without they have a permanent casus belli as long as that claim is there. Activate units. That's activate 1 stack usually. It costs you 1 military. You're allowed to move an army with that. But naval activations work a little differently. You can suck navies together into a space, but remember, you only have 1 fleet, so it's basically you suck the fleet and light ships into a space that they can reach. Recruiting, you're allowed for 1 military cube and enough money to pay for the soldiers that you're recruiting to put them down. Now they're going to be limited by the manpower in the areas you're looking at. Generally, you can recruit from the area that you're recruiting in, and from any adjacent area, and that includes adjacency by sea. And suppress unrest. You can spend 1 military for each province that you wish to flip over from its unrest position to its not unrest position, which will help you later on. Okay. Let's jump back to the sequence. And again, going this is a very high overview of the rules. If I'm especially since I'm avoiding things. So the Peace and Rebels phase. All casus belli that are temporary and all truces are removed from the board at this point. These dynamic nations can fight. Maybe other NPRs can as well. If there are rebel armies on the board, they conduct sieges and or move. Okay, then you go through the peace schedule, and remember there was a whole flow chart for this, right? It's sometimes hard, it's kind of hard to determine what, pieces are available and whatnot, but looking at the rules, it was, it felt a lot less complicated than looking at that flow chart did, but it's still not a trivial facet, or factor. You look and see, hey, what has happened? Like, have I completely conquered all your stuff? Then I can dictate whatever terms I like on you. The first thing that might happen is if you guys are not, if both players are in a position where neither one's holding anything of the other person and they haven't invaded the other person, it's an automatic white peace. Beyond that, it becomes more difficult to generate a peace. Two players can negotiate a peace following different rules, which kind of disturbs me. You basically have a lot of freedom to come to peace with another player that you didn't have in the old EU. The old EU felt more like empires in arms, which said, you know what, you either take a white peace or you take a peace that matches what's going on. But the player negotiation allows you to come to pieces here that things like the Peace of Westphalia, which took forever to implement, I have a game on it somewhere, because the powers could not, they just politically were not in a position where they could accept peace, right? That kind of momentum of a war, that kind of inertia is very, very problematic in this period, where countries were in positions during some of the periods here where they just could not come to a peace. They could not come to a permanent peace. And the war continued on because of that. Okay, where are we here? Okay. Anyway, you resolve whatever comes from the peace. You take any penalties to prestige. If you don't have a leader, you fall into an interregnum. If you have different religions, you might have to incur some dissent, some additional unrest. If you're still at war, you suffer additional unrest. If you go to peace, it cures some of your unrest. And then you roll the rebel dice. And basically, I've already explained that. For each unrest you have, they generate, in a particular area, they generate a die roll. Those die rolls can cause effects that are generally going to be bad, but they might get rid of the unrest. Okay. Income and upkeep. First thing you're allowed to do is you're allowed to release troops and fire advisors and generals. Well, advisors, generals don't cost you anything, that you don't want to pay for anymore. Otherwise, you're going to have to pay for them. And any allied units that are present in your army, like if you have somebody else's troops from somebody else, from another player realm, those would disband automatically. I believe that's what that means. Then you look at your current position of towns and vassals. Oh, I forgot to put any of the Turkish vassals down. We'll do that later, but yeah, that has to be done. And you make sure that your manpower matches what you have on the board. And this can change because as you call in allies and whatnot, they can end up bringing more troops into your pool. So you do have to check this fairly regularly. Also, your town sizes may change and all kind of other stuff that may change that. Okay, you're going to be able to refresh half your exhausted units for free at the end of each round. Your merchants all stand back up if you used them. Yeah, you get additional colonists based on territories that you have claims to overseas. I believe you lose your cube off your national focus if you used that. Okay, we don't deal with bots here, but 10 plus. Yeah, I guess valuable dynamic non-players won't remain allied to you. And bots are going to be players being played by the bot. So, okay, this is plagues and stuff like that. Those clean up after they've had their effect. The number of Imperial cubes will match that, so that's why there's 3 on here. The Imperial Army, if the Emperor is at peace, he can't have the Imperial Army on the board. Oh, where? Oh, guess you use black pieces for them. Not sure. No, that can't be right. Remove tag chits from the status mat. That's the status mat. I don't know why tags would be there. I do not know. Pass the first player token. Ah, yeah. So the first player has this thing in each round, and it will go to the first person who passes, who passed in the previous round. It starts off with the Ottomans. This is problematic for me. If you're used to my stuff, I always go counterclockwise. For this game, they say you must go clockwise, and they give a player order. And the player order can't really be easily changed without disrupting, you know, who's people sitting next to where they're supposed to sit. So I think I'm going to have to actually go clockwise. This may cause me some serious problems. Reset all round status markers, so you'll be marked as passed on the round. That should move back over to no event. Then you discard down to 5 action cards. You could have bought so you have more than 5, but you have to use them and whatnot. And if you're at the end of an age, you go through a special routine to set up for the next era, where you're adding, you know, new ideas into the game. Missions are going to just flow. New milestones, new event. You stack a new event deck, all kind of stuff like that. So each of those 4 ages is going to be a pretty major change. I'm going to swap batteries yet again. I have a few more things to talk about before I think we're done, but the sequence of play was a major factor in this. Okay, the end of age routine, again, I haven't done this, but in addition to preparing the deck, it does allow the person who's kind of losing to tinker with some of the milestones and stuff. Okay, but I wanted to hit final scoring. Once you get to the end of the final age that you're planning on playing, and there goes my damn battery thing. Not charging. It was working fine with this battery, but then I swapped. Okay. First of all, there's there it goes again. God damn it. It seems to be being better now. All right. So there's automatic victory conditions that happen. If there's no more event cards in the decks for the chosen scenario at the end of the round, and a player has at least 100 prestige on the track, and they're at least 20 prestige ahead of the next player, no, there's three things that end it. When there's no more event cards left for the end round that you're playing, since I'm playing the Grand Campaign, that'll be I've run through everything. If a player has the 100 prestige and 20 more, or if a player has all their towns on the board. Basically, the game can't handle an empire getting that big. It is rather large, so we shall see. Oh, and all their vassals. Yeah. What's the chance that all of those things are going to be there? Yeah, I think that's just impossible, and the game can't really handle, like, you run out of big towns or small towns, so I don't know why it's even considering, that you got everything on the board. I'm kind of disturbed by that, actually, because there's some possibility that you could get to a place where you can't really play right, but it's not going to end. And you could also be in a position where two players are very close, and one of them beats the other out by putting all his things. But I think it's a highly unlikely situation. This is used if your ruler is going to be a general. Okay. But when you score this, at the end of the game, you generate additional points. This does not automatically, this ends the game. This does not automatically say somebody won by getting all their markers out. So take that as you like. So in addition to whatever prestige you have generated, you'll get prestige equal to your current tax income. And then for other things that you have, this is little hearts. Yeah, I'm getting tired, man. I'm way past when I normally fall asleep. Core token, yeah. So if you turn an area into a core area, which means you're now the legal owner of all the provinces in that area. So each one of those that you have in play is worth 1. Each royal marriage you have in play is worth 1. Each alliance is worth 2. These are really transient things. In smaller scenarios, they can have a fairly heavy impact, but being papal controller gets you points. The imperial authority level for the emperor can gain them points. Double your current stability, which could be a negative number. You lose prestige for any territories that are occupied or in rebellion, and that can be a real impetus to make you go to the peace table if you know you're coming to the last turn of the game. And you lose 1 for each loan that you have. And then the person with the most wins the game. There's some tiebreakers in there. Good luck. I mean, if it comes to a tie, we should be really shocked. All right. That's the basic overview. Yes, I know I skipped some things I don't know that I'm not that familiar with, but I think it's enough to give you a pretty good idea when I do the playthrough of what's going on. I've got to decide whether or not I want to work my way through a 50-page rule book after I've given you this much of the rules. Digging into all the specifics, it's not of any use to anyone. really. I haven't had anyone come back and say, wow, I'm really glad that you read all the rules aloud to me. I can't imagine that. But on the other hand, you know, watching the playthrough, you might catch some of the places where I've left some holes. So I'm going to I think I'm going to leave those holes in place, and I'm going to jump into this without knowing all the rules. Won't be the first time. I mean, you know, it's not like I haven't read the rules. It's just they don't sink in. And as can be shown, like with the ideas, I completely forgot they existed. I was excited about them while I was reading the rules, but I completely fucking forgot. No guarantees that I'm not going to dive in and look at the rules and give you some additional stuff. No guarantees that I don't look at them secretly on my own so that I know more. But right now I'm pooped out and I want to get this up.